The night before the biggest deadline in Hargrove and Styles Architecture's 40-year history, nobody was supposed to be in the building except the cleaning crew. That was the only reason Declan Marsh was there at all. He pushed his cart down the hallway of the 14th floor, the wheels squeaking against polished concrete, the sound swallowed up by the hum of the HVAC system and the distant whir of servers that never slept. The overhead lights had been dimmed to 60%, energy-saving mode after 8 p.m. And in that half-dark, the open-plan office looked like a museum exhibit. Abandoned coffee cups. Post-it notes bleeding color onto whiteboards. A navy blazer draped over the back of a chair as if its owner had evaporated mid-thought. Declan liked it this way, the quiet. The absence of people who looked through him. He was 41 years old, 6'1", with the kind of broad shoulders that used to mean something different. Back when he wore a hard hat instead of a gray uniform with a plastic badge that read Tissick. He had a daughter named Piper. She was 8. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness and a heart condition that the pediatric cardiologist at Baylor Scott & White described as manageable for now. The for now part was what kept Declan awake on the nights he wasn't working. He had been a structural engineer for 11 years. Bridges, mostly. He'd worked on 3 projects in the Dallas-Fort Worth corridor, the kind of work where the math had to be perfect, because the alternative was people dying. Then the firm he worked for collapsed. Not a bridge, just the company. A Chapter 11 implosion that took his job, his health insurance, and about 6 months of his life before he found his footing again. By then, his wife had decided she didn't want to wait. She left. She was remarried now, living in Phoenix. She called Piper on birthdays and sometimes on Christmas. The security job paid $22 an hour. It wasn't engineering. But it was nights, which meant he could drop Piper at school in the mornings, and pick her up in the afternoons and take her to her cardiology appointments without asking anyone's permission. The math on that was simple enough that even a person who'd never touched a slide rule could understand it. He wasn't bitter about the life he was living. He had stopped being bitter around the time Piper was 5, and she told him very seriously that their apartment smelled like pancakes even when they weren't making pancakes, and that she thought that meant it was a good home. You don't get to be bitter after something like that. He was on his 3rd circuit of the 14th floor when he saw the papers. They were on the floor beside the last workstation in the east corridor. Not a messy scattering, but a neat stack that had clearly slid off the edge of a desk and landed face up. Someone had left in a hurry. The papers had a cover sheet that read in bold, Silver Creek Pedestrian Bridge, Final Instructional Submission Package, Dallas County Public Works, deadline 9 a.m., November 14, tomorrow. 9 a.m., which was 11 hours and 40 minutes away. Declan set the papers on the desk. He was going to walk away. He told himself that very clearly, the same way he told Piper to eat her vegetables. Firmly, without a lot of faith that it would work. He didn't walk away. He sat down on the edge of the desk chair, angled the papers toward the light from the nearest window, and started reading. It wasn't nostalgia exactly. It was more like muscle memory, the way a carpenter's eye automatically finds the joint that doesn't sit flush. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just reading Force of Habit. 11 years of Force of Habit. He found the error on page 37. He almost missed it. It was buried in the load distribution table, a single transposed coefficient in the lateral load calculation. The kind of mistake that happens when someone has been staring at spreadsheets for 70 hours, and their brain stops checking the numbers against reality. The coefficient was off by a factor that in isolation looked almost plausible. But Declan had spent 2 years working on a pedestrian bridge project in Tarrant County, and he knew what the lateral load tolerances looked like for a span of this width over this soil classification, and the number in front of him was wrong, not slightly wrong. Wrong in a way that would sail through a standard review because reviewers looked at whether the formula was applied correctly, not whether the input values were physically coherent. He sat there for a long moment, the building quiet around him, the papers in his hands. If the submission went in with that error, and if it was caught in the county's technical review, and it would be caught eventually maybe by someone like him, maybe by someone who'd been doing bridge work longer, Hargrove and Styles would lose the contract, at minimum. Potentially, they'd be flagged for a compliance audit. A $180 million public works bid, 4 years of relationship building with Dallas County, and the jobs of the 312 people who worked in this building, all of it balanced on a transposed number that some exhausted engineer had been too tired to catch. He knew what he should do. He knew what a reasonable person in his position would do. Leave the papers on the desk, finish his shift, go home, make Piper's lunch for tomorrow. He also knew he wasn't going to do that. The executive suite on the 16th floor was lit up like noon. Declan could see it from the stairwell window as he came up, the floor-to-soiling glass walls throwing light into the dark atrium, silhouettes moving behind frosted conference room panels. They were still here. Of course they were. The night before a $180 million submission deadline, they were still here. He took a breath and pushed through the stairwell door. The 16th floor felt different from the 14th. There was a receptionist's station, unstaffed at this hour, but the desk was a statement, dark walnut, gold lettering. A flower arrangement that probably cost more than Declan's monthly car payment. The carpet was the kind that swallowed footsteps. Everything about the space said, "You are here by invitation only." A man came out of the side corridor before Declan made it 10 feet past the elevator bank. He was mid-30s in a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a Hargrove and Styles lanyard bouncing against his chest. His name badge read Assistant Project Manager Brentley Cross. He had the look of someone who had been awake for a very long time and had decided to make up for it in attitude. He stopped, looked at Declan's uniform, looked at the papers in Declan's hand. "Can I help you?" the tone said. "You should not be here. I need to speak with the project lead," Declan said. "Tonight, our team is in final preparation. They're not available." Brentley Cross crossed his arms. "You can submit a maintenance request through the— This isn't a maintenance issue." Declan kept his voice level. "I found a structural error in your Silver Creek submission package. Page 37, lateral load table. The soil interaction coefficient is off. I need to speak with whoever owns the structural calculations before 9 a.m. A beat of silence. Brentley Cross looked at him the way people look at something unexpected. Not quite processing it yet, sorting it into a category. The category he landed on was visible on his face. This man is a security guard, and security guards do not find structural errors. Where did you even get those? He nodded at the papers. They were on the floor. 14th floor, East Corridor. Those are proprietary documents. I'm aware. Which is why I brought them up here instead of leaving them on the floor." Declan kept his voice patient. He had practice with patience. He had an 8-year-old. "I'm telling you there's a calculation error in your submission package." "Who do I need to talk to?" Brentley Cross straightened. "I'm going to need you to give me those documents and go back to your station." "I'm not trying to cause problems," Declan said. "I'm trying to prevent them." "Who is the project structural lead?" "That's not information I'm going to share with." Brentley paused in a way that managed to complete the sentence without finishing it. Declan understood what the pause meant. He had heard that pause before in different forms, in different rooms. It didn't make him angry anymore. Anger was a luxury he'd gotten over sometime around Piper's 3rd cardiology appointment, when he realized that the energy he spent being furious about things he couldn't change was energy he wasn't spending on his daughter. "Then get me someone who will talk to me," Declan said. "Because I've been standing here for 3 minutes, and every one of those minutes is a minute closer to 9 a.m. Brentley Cross stared at him for another long moment. Then he turned on his heels and disappeared down the corridor. Declan stood at the receptionist's desk and waited. He could hear voices through the frosted glass, someone raised, someone lower, the rhythm of an argument. His reflection floated in the dark walnut surface of the desk. He looked tired. He was tired. He thought about Piper asleep in her bed at his sister's house 3 miles away, her blanket pulled up to her chin, and he thought about the cardiologist's most recent words. Manageable, for now. He thought about what for now cost every 6 months in monitoring appointments, in copays, in the thing that sat in the back of his chest like a stone. He was still thinking about it when the conference room door opened and a woman came out. She was somewhere in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the look of someone who had not sat down in approximately 14 hours. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a red pen clipped to her breast pocket. Her lanyard read Eleanor Hargrove, Principal Architect. She stopped 3 feet from Declan and looked at him with an expression that was not Brentley's dismissal. It was something more considered. She looked at the papers, then at his face, then at the papers again. "You said page 37, she said. Not a question, she'd already been told. "Yes, show me." The conference room looked like a war had been fought there in document form and nobody had bothered to bury the casualties. Printouts covered every inch of the long table. 3 monitors were open, each showing different views of the same CAD model. Someone had taped a hand-drawn timeline to the wall. A chain of dates and checkboxes, most of them ticked, the last one a red circle around 9 a.m. submit. 3 people were standing when Declan walked in. 2 sat down when they saw his uniform. The third, a tall man in his 40s with heavy-framed glasses and the haggard look of someone personally responsible for a $180 million deadline, stayed standing and said, "Brentley told me you found an error in the lateral load table." "I did," Declan said. Our team has reviewed this package 4 times in the past 72 hours, I know. Declan set the papers on the table and turned to page 37. Your formula is correct. Your application of the formula is correct. The input value isn't. He pointed. This soil interaction coefficient, 0.73. For a span this width, this length, Category C soil classification in North Texas clay, that coefficient should sit between 0.89 and 0.94. Your lateral load distribution is undersized by approximately 18%. Silence in the room. The man with heavy glasses, his badge read Constructural Lead, leaned over the table and looked where Declan was pointing. His expression shifted through several stages that Declan watched carefully. Skepticism, attention, concentration, and then something that was not quite alarm but was in the same neighborhood. Eleanor Hargrove was already pulling up the soil classification table on the nearest monitor. How do you know that range? The structural lead said. He wasn't hostile anymore. His voice had gone quiet in the way of someone doing rapid internal calculations. I worked on the Elm Fork pedestrian connector in Tarrant County, Declan said. Same soil profile. We had a similar span. Our coefficient was 0.91. When? 2014 through 2016. I was with Meridian Structural before they folded. The room was very quiet. Outside the floor-to-soiling windows, Dallas glittered in the dark. 10,000 lights that had nothing to do with any of this, indifferent and beautiful. The structural lead straightened. He looked at Eleanor Hargrove. She was already looking at him. Pull the Tarrant County data, she said. I have it, someone at a laptop said. 3 seconds of keyboard sounds. Then he's right. The coefficient range for comparable parameters is 0.88 to 0.93. A pause. We're at 0.73. The room seemed to exhale. Brentley Cross, who had positioned himself near the door in the manner of someone hoping to be associated with none of what was happening, made a sound that didn't quite become a word. How long to recalculate the affected sections? Eleanor Hargrove said. Her voice was even. It was the voice of someone who had weathered things before and knew that panic was the most expensive thing you could spend in a crisis. 2 hours, the structural lead said. Maybe 2.5, then we have time. She looked at the clock on the wall. 11:47 p.m., we have time. She turned to Declan. For a moment, she said nothing. In that moment, Declan felt the weight of the room. Felt these people actually seeing him, which was a different sensation than being looked at. What's your name? Declan Marsh. How long have you been doing security, Declan? 16 months. Before Meridian folded. How long in structural engineering? 11 years. She studied him. Then she looked at her team. Get him a chair. Get him something to drink. He's staying. They worked through the night. Declan didn't recalculate for them. That wasn't what they needed. What they needed was someone who had done this before, who could look at a revised number and say, yes, that's within the coherent range. Or, no, back up, something else is off. That's what he did. He sat at the corner of the conference table with a cup of coffee that someone had brought from the kitchen 2 floors down, and he reviewed. He answered questions. He caught 2 secondary inconsistencies in the revised load path analysis. Small things. Things that might have cleared the county review anyway, but things that mattered. At one point, around 2 in the morning, the structural lead, his name was Owen. Declan had eventually learned from the conversation around him, a different Owen from the list of names he'd never seen and wouldn't have known to avoid, stopped typing and looked at him. Why didn't you just leave those papers on the desk, Owen said. Declan thought about it. Because if that bridge ever had a problem, he said, I would know I was in the building the night before the submission. Owen nodded slowly. That's a heavy way to think. I have a daughter, Declan said. I think in heavy terms. He told them about Piper around 3:30, not because it was relevant, but because Eleanor Hargrove had asked him, in one of the quieter moments between calculations, what had brought him to Dallas and why he'd taken a security position instead of trying to land with another engineering firm. He told her the short version, the layoff, the divorce, the scheduling math, the cardiology appointments. He kept his voice matter-of-fact. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was just answering the question she'd asked. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, You restructured your entire career around her schedule. It's not complicated, Declan said. She needed someone there. I'm her dad. Eleanor Hargrove looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something between professional assessment and something more personal. She had photographs on the credenza along the wall, family photographs, the kind that accumulate in an office over years. He hadn't looked closely at them. He didn't feel it was his place. The submission package, she said, goes in at 9. I know. After that, she said, I'd like you to come back, during business hours. I'd like to talk to you about something. He wasn't sure what to make of that. He filed it away and went back to the calculations. The final revised package was completed at 5:18 a.m. The structural lead ran the verification sequence twice. Eleanor Hargrove reviewed the summary tables herself. Then she printed the signature page, signed it with the red pen she'd had clipped to her pocket all night, and set it down. "Good," she said. That was all she said. But the room understood what it meant. Declan finished his shift, turned in his report at the security desk on the ground floor. A completely ordinary report, because he had done his job and nothing in his job description required him to document what had happened on the 16th floor, and walked out into the Dallas morning. The sun was coming up over the eastern skyline, orange and flat and enormous, the way November suns are when the air is clear. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a few minutes, too tired to drive immediately, and thought about Piper waking up at his sister's house and asking what was for breakfast, and how he should pick up something on the way. He picked up donuts. She was delighted by the donuts. She ate too, and gave him a look that said she suspected he had done something interesting the night before. The way children sometimes sense these things, and then she went off to brush her teeth, and he sat at his sister's kitchen table and thought about nothing in particular for a few minutes. That felt like enough. Eleanor Hargrove called him 3 days later. She had found his number through the building security contractor. There had been some paperwork involved, she explained, because she had wanted to make sure she was doing things correctly. She said Hargrove and Stiles had won the Silver Creek contract. She said it simply, without fanfare, in the way of someone reporting a fact rather than making an announcement. Dallas County had issued the notice of award that morning. Then she said, "I want to offer you a position." The position was a re-entry role, structural review analyst, a title she had created after a conversation with her HR director about what exactly to call someone who was returning to the field after a gap. The salary was $84,000 a year, with full benefits on day one, and a flexible schedule that could be built around a school-age child. She had, she said, taken the liberty of looking into what Declan's engineering certifications would require to be reinstated in Texas, and the answer was a continuing education course and a re-licensure application, both of which the company would pay for. Declan sat on the edge of his bed and held the phone and didn't say anything for a long moment. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course," Eleanor Hargrove said. "I'll call you tomorrow." He called her the next morning. He told her yes. He told Piper on a Saturday because Saturday was their day. Pancakes in the morning, something outside in the afternoon, a movie at night if she wasn't too tired. He told her over breakfast, at their small kitchen table, the window behind her catching the November light. He tried to explain it in terms that made sense to an 8-year-old, which required simplifying things, but not by much. "You're going to be an engineer again?" Piper said. "Looks like it." She thought about this for a moment. She had a very deliberate way of thinking. She would go quiet and her eyes would do something, a kind of inward focusing, like she was consulting a reference she kept somewhere internal. "Did you fix something?" she asked. "I caught a mistake. Before it became a problem. In a building? A bridge." She nodded. She picked up her fork. "I think that's good," she said, with the gravity of someone delivering a considered verdict. "Bridges are important. They are. We use the bridge on Preston Road every time we go to my doctor." "I know," Declan said. "So that matters," she said, and she went back to her pancakes. He looked at her small, serious face, at the dark hair she'd gotten from him and the stubborn set of her jaw she'd gotten from somewhere deep in the family line, at the way she ate her breakfast with complete focus as if it were a task worth doing properly, and he felt something he couldn't have named exactly if someone had asked him to. Not pride exactly, though pride was in it. Not relief, though there was plenty of that too. It was more like the feeling of a calculation that had finally resolved. All the inputs and the tolerances and the long, uncertain math of the last several years arriving quietly at a number that held. The Silver Creek pedestrian bridge opened 14 months later on a Thursday in January, in the kind of North Texas winter that can't decide if it's cold or just dramatic. There was a ribbon cutting. A county commissioner gave a short speech about infrastructure and community investment. A photographer from the Dallas Morning News was there. Declan stood at the back of the small crowd with Piper next to him, her hand in his. She was bundled in a red coat, a knit hat with a small pompon on top, her chin tucked down against the wind. She watched the ribbon fall and the first people walk out onto the new bridge, and she watched the water running below, gray-green and moving. "Did you help build this?" she asked. "In a way," Declan said. "I helped make sure the math was right." She looked at the bridge for a moment. "It looks strong," she said. "It is," he said. She squeezed his hand. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. The crowd began to move forward, people stepping out onto the bridge for the first time, their footsteps a soft percussion on the new deck. Declan stayed where he was for a moment, just watching. The bridge, the water, his daughter's breath making small clouds in the cold air. He thought about the night he'd found those papers on the 14th floor. He thought about the cart with the squeaking wheel, the dimmed lights, the way the building had felt like a museum of other people's urgency. He thought about standing in front of Brentley Cross and keeping his voice even. He thought about the conference room at 2 in the morning, coffee going cold beside a stack of calculations. He thought about all the things that had to go exactly right, and all the things that had already gone wrong, to put him in that hallway on that night with 11 years of structural engineering stored in his bones. And then Piper tugged his hand because she wanted to walk across the bridge, and he let her pull him forward, out onto the deck, into the January wind, into the steady, grounded, load-bearing fact of a structure that would hold.